is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories this hour. China's foreign minister goes to Washington for talks on China-US relations and efforts to stop the Israel-Hamas conflict from spreading. Hundreds more Palestinians killed as Israeli airstrikes hit residential areas in southern Gaza. Hospitals struggle with a lack of fuel. Israeli tanks enter Gaza in an overnight raid. The army says it's in preparation for the next stage of combat. And a manhunt continues in the US state of Maine for a gunman suspected of killing at least 16 people. China's top diplomat is expected to arrive in Washington in the coming hours for 2 days of meetings with the Biden administration. China and the United States are seeking to rebuild relations after a series of unresolved trade disputes and policy differences in areas like the conflict in Ukraine. The recent upsurge in violence in the Middle East is also expected to be high on the agenda. China has called for an immediate ceasefire between Hamas and Israel to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Well, CGTN's Jim Spellman is in Washington, D.C. Good to see you, Jim. Now, it's a packed schedule. What can we expect from Wang Yi's visit?
Yeah, so we expect Wang Yi to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken here at the U.S. State Department later today. Tomorrow, on Friday, Wang Yi expected to meet with the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and potentially meet with U.S. President Joe Biden. That's not official at this point, but that is a much whispered potential meeting here in Washington. Running through this whole set of meetings here are possible preparations for what could be a meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping at APEC in San Francisco next month. Neither side has confirmed that such a meeting will take place. But again, lots of whispers about that here in Washington. Now, in recent days, we've heard a lot of optimistic talk from both sides about easing tensions in this relationship, but there are still serious divisions. You have the long-standing issues like Taiwan, the South China Sea, and then, of course, you have disagreements over these newer global conflicts. Juliet?
And speaking of those newer global conflicts, Jim, what can we expect to hear in terms of Gaza, in terms of Ukraine?
Yeah, so with Ukraine, what the United States is going to look for is assurances from China that they won't actively get involved with helping Russia in this conflict. The U.S., of course, backing Ukraine. While China has called for a much different approach, calling for a ceasefire and peace talks, we see a similar dynamic playing out with the conflict in Israel and Gaza. The U.S. steadfastly backing Israel, while China calling for a ceasefire and peace talks moving towards a two-state solution. One thing the United States is going to look for regarding the conflict in Israel's Gaza is help from China to ensure this doesn't expand into a larger regional conflict. There are concerns here in Washington that perhaps Iran could get involved, and this could become a much bigger issue spreading throughout the Middle East. Washington knows that Beijing simply has more credibility with many Arab nations than the United States does. We've seen just in the last day a new plan from China to devote $2 million in aid to Gaza. Juliet?
Jim, what about those areas of common interest? Are there expectations of progress on things like climate action and things like trade?
Yeah, so climate is a perennial issue of potential cooperations. And we saw this come up just in the last day or so with California Governor Gavin Newsom's trip to China. He met with Wang Yi there, and he met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Climate change, the main issue of those talks. And then when it comes to trade, what China really would like is what they just call equal treatment for Chinese tech firms that have restrictions in place on them operating here in the United States. And they would like to see those tariffs that have been in place since the Trump era lifted so that Chinese companies can have a level playing ground. This was a topic when the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo visited China in August. She left there saying she was optimistic that there could be some sort of agreement reached, but the White House cautions us not to expect any major concrete agreements to come out of this week's talks. Juliet?
Jim Spellman, thank you very much indeed. That's our correspondent, Jim Spellman in Washington. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes that hit residential areas in southern Gaza overnight. The Israeli military also carried out ground raids in Gaza's north, saying it was preparation for the next stage of combat against the Palestinian armed group Hamas. At least 7,000 people have been killed in Gaza since October the 7th. That's when Hamas launched that unprecedented attack on Israel, killing more than 1,400 people, taking 224 hostages. Our correspondent Noor Harazin travelled to an area in Gaza that has been decimated by airstrikes.
This neighborhood used to be called Southern Al-Rimal neighborhood, such a colorful place full of shops and restaurants and residential buildings. However, this is what was left after continuous Israeli airstrikes on the neighborhood. Thousands of Palestinian families used to reside here. However, they are now displaced. Some fled to southern Gaza. Some took shelter in hospitals or UN schools, even though there is no place safe in Gaza. But the people are steadfast and waiting their unknown destiny. With one very important question: what will happen to those who lost their homes when this war ends?
An intensive manhunt is underway in the US state of Maine after at least 16 people were killed and dozens wounded in 2 mass shootings. The police have expanded a lockdown order to 3 more communities as they search for a suspect they've identified as 40-year-old Robert R. Card. Yoav David has more.
Early evening in Lewiston, and people are trying to escape from locations near where 2 shootings had been reported. A lone gunman attacked a restaurant and a bowling alley. And in all too familiar scenes, police cars and ambulances rushed to help victims.
Out of nowhere, he just came in and there was a loud pop. Thought it was a balloon. I had my back turned to the door. And as soon as I turned and saw that it was not a balloon, he was holding a weapon, I just booked it down the lane, and I slid basically into where the pins are and climbed up in the machine and was on top of the machines for about 10 minutes until the cops got there.
Police guard a local hospital as an intensive manhunt was launched with hundreds of officers searching an area in the northeast of the United States.
Police are currently searching for a Robert R. Card, 4/4 of 1983 of Bowdoin. Card is considered armed and dangerous. He is a person of interest, however, and that's what we'll label him at moving forward until that changes. If people see him, they should not approach Card or make contact with him in any way.
State and local police released a photograph of 40-year-old Robert Card, saying he was considered dangerous. He is a certified arms instructor and a member of the US Army Reserves. People were warned not to approach him. Outside the main hospital in the area, relatives have been waiting anxiously for any news. President Biden has been briefed, and the federal government has promised whatever support is needed. For now, a shelter-in-place order has been issued for residents in Lewiston and the nearby town of Lisbon. A small city of 38,000 people in Maine has been added to a long list of places in the United States to have suffered from a mass shooting. Yoav David, CGTN.
Well, let's return to our story now from the Middle East and the conflict that's taking place in Gaza and get the view from Israel. Our correspondent Sarah Coates is in Tel Aviv. Sarah, the Israeli military are confirming more ground raids in northern Gaza. What can you tell us?
Hello there, Juliet. Well, look, the IDF does say that it conducted what it's calling a relatively large incursion into the northern part of the Gaza Strip in the early hours of this morning, saying that these troops are now back on the Israeli side of the Gaza border. Now, these are pictures you've got coming in of tanks, also armoured bulldozers, and, of course, military personnel moving into that area. There they came through a wall, a part of the Gaza border wall, before firing at a built-up area. Now, the military spokesperson for the IDF, he's come out to say that we eliminated terrorists, neutralised threats, dismantled explosives and neutralised ambushes in order to enable the next stage of the war for ground forces. Now, this came after the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation overnight, saying that this operation will happen, calling Hamas operatives dead men walking. Now, look, in terms of just how long this may go on for, Juliet, we do have a bit of an indication. Benny Gantz, who is the opposition leader and one of the members of this war cabinet, he has said that stability and safety, security may not be restored in these southern communities for at least a few years.
Well, Sarah, the Israeli government has reiterated warnings to other regional groups about getting involved in this conflict, mindful, as you say, that it might be months, if not years.
Certainly. Well, look, Benny Gantz speaking out again amid this cross-border fire that's been seen on the border up north with Lebanon. He has issued a warning at the group operating in Lebanon, Hezbollah, saying do not open an additional front in the north. The IDF is a strong shield on the entire northern border, adding that Hezbollah is being hit hard. This is how it will continue. I suggest our enemies not get confused. The might is tremendous and ready to pounce. It will be smart for our enemies to back off. And look, Juliet, this is really why we've potentially seen this pause in this ground operation from the IDF, with reports coming in that Israel has been pressured by the United States as the US tries to bring in more aerial defence systems amid real fears of a wider spillover in the region. Juliet.
Sarah, you talk about the pause in the ground offensive and pressure from the United States, but what is the feeling that you're getting from people in Israel in terms of what happens next, what should happen next?
Really, Juliet, it's pretty much everyone, it's all everyone is talking about. As you can imagine, around 360,000 IDF reservists have been called up, which is the biggest call-up in history. It means that many businesses, as sharp people, have their family members away from home for a pretty prolonged period. And with this massive build-up that's being seen there on the Gaza border, it certainly seems like it must happen soon. But like people here, let me tell you, they are pretty worried, they are pretty frightened, given the chance that Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies could get involved, with the US's support really being recognised and really being hailed here in Israel amid a pretty scary time for people who live in this region.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we'll be speaking to the World Health Organization about why getting fuel into Gaza is so important.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
This week on Razor, could plastic degrading fungi and bacteria be one of the answers to cleaning up our modern mess?
I'm looking for some strands that can degrade plastics on the plate. You will see these are mostly bacteria, and they form a clear halo zone. That means this bacteria is eating the plastic.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. China's foreign minister goes to Washington for talks on US-China relations and efforts to stop the Israel-Hamas conflict from spreading. Hundreds more Palestinians killed as Israeli airstrikes hit residential areas in southern Gaza and hospitals struggle with a lack of fuel. Israeli tanks enter Gaza in an overnight raid. The army says it's in preparation for the next stage of combat. Now, one of the key issues around getting aid into Gaza is the supply of fuel. We can get the latest on this from WHO spokesperson Tarek Jashagrevich, who's in Cairo. The UNRWA says that fuel in Gaza is running out fast and that relief workers are now rationing supplies. What's your understanding of the situation?
Well, indeed, there is a big need for fuel right now in Gaza. Not only to run generators that provide electricity to hospitals, but also for desalination plants. So there could be a clean water for the population, but also for the health facilities. Simply, you cannot run hospitals without electricity. You cannot not have light in your hospital. And there are surgical theaters, there are incubators, there are dialysis machines, there are other machines that simply need electricity. So this is why when we say fuel is equally important as medical supplies like medicines and medical material, because simply we need these hospitals to continue to provide medical care to all those who are injured, but not only to them, to pregnant women, to people with chronic diseases, people who are doing cancer treatment, newborns. So there is a really big number of people from mostly vulnerable groups in the population who need hospitals and health centers to keep running.
Yeah.
However, right now, there are 12 out of 35 hospitals that are out of service, and others are really rationing little fuel that they have.
So huge potential consequences if the fuel runs out, big consequences for relief efforts. But Israel blames Hamas for the humanitarian crisis and says that Israel allows medicine, food, water into the Gaza Strip. What's your understanding?
What we know from WHO side is that we were only able to bring 4 trucks of medical supplies on Saturday, and since then we were not able to bring more. That is nowhere enough of what is needed right now. And again, beside medical supplies, we need fuel because we need hospitals to be running. Otherwise, the lives of patients will be in danger. Another issue is having security guarantees to bring these supplies to north of Gaza. There are hospitals in north of Gaza that are hosting more than 2,000 patients right now, and they are also running of medical supplies and fuel. So all these people who are, again, we are talking about babies, we are talking about people who have renal problems, who need dialysis, people on ventilators. We talk also about there are 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza, and these women need medical care if they get complications during birth. There are people with physical handicaps. So there are really a big portion of population that depends on healthcare, and healthcare requires things like fuel, water, clean water, and medical supplies.
You've already mentioned security guarantees as being crucial at this point. So what is the solution in addition to those security guarantees to the impending fuel crisis? Is it a humanitarian tunnel? Is it a ceasefire?
No, what we need is a safe, sustained, and uninterrupted access to Gaza. So we need to be sure that we can bring as many material we need and we have right now on the Egyptian side of the border really trucks and trucks waiting. So we need uninterrupted and safe access to Gaza to bring those supplies. We also need to make sure that we can bring in a safe way, that the trucks, that medical workers who are bringing those supplies to hospitals, who are receptioning them, will not be a target. Eventually, what is really needed is the end of hostilities. Even if we bring in medical material, medicines, even fuel, if the fighting is continuing, if bombardment is continuing, there will be more casualties, there will be more wounded people, there will be more deaths.
We've already reported on Israeli forces making moves in northern Gaza in preparation for the next stage. If there is this ground offensive by Israeli forces, what contingencies do you and do aid agencies have in place to continue to operate in Gaza?
Well, from WHO side, we have our staff on the ground. They have been living in Gaza. They have their families, and they are continuing to do what they can. So they're trying to provide hospitals with whatever material comes in or can be found inside the Gaza. If you have a fighting, if you have bombardment, necessarily there will be a high number of casualties. So people with a burn wounds, people with fractures, people who get pieces of metal in their body from bombs. These people need to be treated in 16 minutes following their injury. Otherwise, the chances of survival go down. So really what we need is that there is a possibility to treat those people. But eventually, if you have an active fighting in any zone, it's difficult to see that hospitals, how hospitals can continue to work. And we have already recorded more than 60 attacks on hospitals in Gaza. 16 health workers have already lost their lives on duty, providing care to people. So it's healthcare workers in Gaza are doing an amazing job. At the same time, they fear for their lives. They have to take care of the safety of their family. And at the same time, they're really doing their best to treat people. So what we can do is try to help them so they can do their job.
Tarek Jasharevic in Cairo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In other news, Sudan's army is set to resume peace talks with the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces. Negotiating teams arrived in Saudi Arabia early this week. The army has warned that the talks do not mean the conflict will stop. Sudan's health ministry says at least 3,000 people have died since fighting began in April. More than 6,000 have been injured. Slovakia's new Prime Minister, Robert Fico, says his country will stop military aid to Ukraine, but will continue to support its neighbour with humanitarian aid. Fico also says that the European Union should move from being an arms supplier to a peacemaker. The comments come a day after his appointment as head of a coalition government. Thousands of Mexican soldiers and rescue workers are cleaning up after Hurricane Otis slammed into the city of Acapulco. Officials say at least 27 people were killed and several are missing. Otis was one of the strongest hurricanes ever to hit Mexico's Pacific coast, flooding streets, ripping roofs off homes and severing communications. China's manned space mission Shenzhou 17 has successfully docked with the Tiangong space station. The docking happened 6 hours after the spacecraft carrying 3 astronauts lifted off from northwestern China's Gansu province. The crew will rotate with the Shenzhou 16 trio and are expected to stay in orbit for about 6 months. They'll conduct spacewalks to carry out external maintenance on the space station for the first time. Zhu Yangsong is Director General of Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. I spoke to him about the main tasks the Shenzhou 17 mission has.
There are basically 3 things that they have to bear in mind at all times. One is to maintain the operation of the station, including the life support system, the water circulation, the food, the rendezvous and docking of cargoes, and departure of astronauts. The second, of course, is the normal application process in the space labs, including different testings, and the testing results needs to be recorded, and also the facilities needs to be operated on daily basis. And third is, of course, the contingency plan. Any emergency cases in the station could be fatal. So they have to came up with many plans, and also they have to have a logbook in case of any disasters. So these are 3 things that basically they have in mind at full time, and they have to do it on a daily basis.
And what is your take on China's progress and ambitions in space? Is it really all about the science?
It's all about exploration of space and to know the unknown of the universe. We know that we have a very comprehensive lunar missions starting from Chang'e 1 all the way now to Chang'e 5 with successful 1.7 plus kilos of sample return back to Earth. And also we're planning to have Chang'e 6, which is going to be landing on the far side of the moon for sample return missions. And number 7 and 8 is going to be on polar missions. So the lunar exploration is very intense. And also we have Mars missions. And the next one, we have knowledge that the previous one has already achieved orbiting, landing, and roving. The next one is going to be a sample return from Mars. And there are many missions, including a combination of human missions and robotic missions. So these are very ambitious ones. These are for scientific objectives, and these are fully open for international cooperation.
So you talk about bringing back samples, robotic missions, human missions, but the last time a human set foot on the moon was in 1972 under the US Apollo program. So getting back there is what space agencies are talking about. How realistic is it, though, China's plans to land astronauts on the moon by the end of the decade?
Well, we see that there's an Artemis missions, and also there are many missions that is in plan by U.S. and European and many other countries that is joining this plan. They have a very realistic plan, I think, is to be setting foot on the moon. But this time they're going to have a comprehensive plan to land on the surface of the moon for extensive period of time, let's say weeks or even months. So this will have a more challenging comprehensive plans, including a commercial sector who's going to land resources on the surface of the moon before we have a separate return mission, the human missions. And also, as I mentioned, that the robotic mission will have a combination with the human missions in the future, in particular lunar and planetary exploration missions. This is also a Chinese plan. As we can see, a miniature plan has been demonstrated by Chang'e 5, which including an orbiter, a lander, a sample return, ascending module, and also rendezvous and docking. All this technology has been demonstrated in a miniature process. So we are more or less ready for the enlarged sample human missions.
The headlines again. China's foreign minister goes to Washington for talks on China-US relations and efforts to stop the Israel-Hamas conflict from spreading. Hundreds more Palestinians killed as Israeli airstrikes hit residential areas in southern Gaza and hospitals struggle with a lack of fuel. Israeli tanks enter Gaza in an overnight raid. The army says it's in preparation for the next stage of combat. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. Back with Paul Barber with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team here in London, goodbye.